Looks like Paul Ferguson had me fooled during trial, but he didn't fool the judge during sentencing, and we're going to talk about it in today's video. Hello, Sofa Squad, and welcome back to the sofa. Sofa's not back there. The mountains are, though. That's kind of preferred. Although we do miss our little Roscoe, our mascot if you're new here. My little Chihuahua, who's back home right now. And my name is Paul, the host, the weird guy talking to you right now. Now, what we are talking about today is we are going to be talking very quickly about Paul Ferguson's sentencing. The way this video will work is I've picked out some clips from the sentencing to talk about, to make commentary on, and kind of sum up in between those clips. At the end of the video, I'll talk about my opinions and whatnot on it. Now, what we'll do here in a minute before we begin is we'll get into a very quick just overview of the case, and I'm talking like a couple of sentences worth, just so you know what we're talking about, and that's it. Now, before we do jump in, if you want to follow me and Roscoe, who's not here right now, outside of the YouTube, so this little phone screen, well, I guess it's still on the phone screen, but you can go to Insta, you can go to Gram, you can go to Instagram. It's on the screen. It's on the description. Go on, click it. Now, here's what's going on, how I arrived at this video. Paul Ferguson is the son of Shanda Vander Ark. She recently went to trial, or recently was found guilty of abusing and taking the life of her son Timothy. Paul, they're all related, right? These are her two sons. Paul was essentially like her right-hand man, if you will. She would instruct him of what to do to Timothy, how to punish him, and he would do it. And so while he did turn state's evidence and testify against his mother, and to get like a lesser charge, that type stuff, it still, I guess it did maybe pan out for him after what we heard what the judge said, but that's what happened. So he testified against his mother at trial, and now his sentencing has come up, and that's what we're talking about today. So again, what we're going to do is we're going to look at some clips and whatnot. Now let's go ahead and just kind of talk for a second and arrive at the beginning of this whole little journey of sentencing of Paul. So the judge starts off, he's like talking about these psych evaluations that he got back on Paul. However, they're going to basically keep these like non-public, but they're taken into consideration. Now, the lawyer would point out letters that were sent in by family on the behalf of Paul, and the judge is like, yes, we'll consider that. Awesome, that, whatever. Now, the state would also speak, and he said that we did view him as favorable since he helped. He testified against his mother and whatnot. But at the same time, the state was like, we're still angry at him in a sense because he was his mother's enforcer. Now, he also spoke of the psych evals and said, yes, they did display the fact that his upbringing led him to being the person that he was, through abuse, neglect, this type stuff. And no one ever tried to get him help. And this kind of informed them as to like the why this took place. However, they would say that one sentence in these evals stuck out to him.
In Dr. Shazer's report is that it says, in my opinion, Paul Ferguson was predisposed to abuse his brother independent of his mother's presence and active influence in his life. That's frankly scary.
And I'll have to agree with him on this. Now, he said that there's other parts that showed that Paul was acting independently of his mother's orders. And he did say that he felt Paul's mother took advantage of him and had him to do these things. And unfortunately, he was willing to go along with these things. Now, he did feel like Paul was truthful and instrumental to get the conviction against his mother. Or the state asked to go within the guidelines, but the state does say that he believes there are reasons to go above and below the guidelines. And then the state asks something interesting.
I would ask the court, however, to impose a maximum number here that is essentially equivalent to what Paul's life expectancy would be. And the reason for that is that if some of the bad that's indicated in these reports is actually present and Paul does not receive treatment for that, and those conditions that are noted here, most notably the potential antisocial disorder, essentially a sociopath, if those things are borne out in the prison system, that the prison system then has the opportunity to keep Paul locked up as long as possible.
The defense will also speak, and they'll be like, you know what? We understand that the state stance that Paul's the enforcer. We get it. But they also remind the court that there are numerous text messages and evidence showing the instruction laid out by Paul's mother to him as to what to do. Now, the defense will say that he believes that Shanda did way more, but there's no evidence nor anyone to testify, because the only person to testify, unfortunately, they took his life. Now, the defense will also outline several things that they really want the court to focus on. I'm just going to continue to read from my notes here. So then one of those is his capacity to understand. Another Another one is looking at the dynamic of rivalry between siblings versus the care one expects from parents. And another one was that Paul was follower and mother was the leader. We don't get the whole picture because aside from text messages, she talked to him other ways. But again, there was never a time that Paul gave her instruction. And again, there's not a witness to testify, Timothy's gone. He took his life. Also, Paul's cooperation and that he has shown remorse. We're going to air quote that one. Now, they'll look at the evaluation. It shows that Paul and other symptoms were victims of his mother. And the defense will say that Timothy was not considered useful in the household by the mother and therefore was treated that way, which is essentially why Paul wanted to pivot himself to be useful. That makes sense.
And part of understanding that is also understanding that if he didn't follow instructions, if he misbehaved, if he got on her bad side, that he could once again be subject to some of the same mistreatment. On the neglect front, I don't think any of them ever ceased to be subject to that mistreatment.
Now, the state will also offer that it's become this belief, and I was of this belief as well from the court, from watching court and stuff like that, that Paul is on the autism spectrum, but that neither of the reports reflected that as even an issue. Now, in a moment, the judge will go deeper into that, and then the court will give Paul a chance to speak.
What reasons could justify my actions? I could make up 1,000 and never believe one. What words could voice my regrets? I can think of millions, yet never feel it's enough.
Now, he'll also say that he's had time to think that while he's in jail and reflect on things, and he does ask for mercy and compassion from the judge so that he might learn that himself. It was very short and very quick. I was very surprised by that. And then the judge spoke, and speak the judge did. Okay. The judge said that he was concerned with Paul's intellectual capabilities, and the court was also concerned if he was the target of manipulation from his mother. And then the judge would reference those evaluations.
He, referring to Mr. Ferguson, was clearly either psychotic or suffering from symptoms of a mood disorder at the time of the court interview. And he was apparently functioning within at least the normal range of intellectual ability at this time. Thus, in my opinion, he does not suffer from a chronic psychotic disorder, a chronic mood disorder, or an intellectual disability.
Wow. Okay. The judge continues.
With him suffering from intellectual deficits, and as noted above, he was apparently functioning within at least the normal range of intellectual ability at the time of the court interview. In my opinion, the defendant clearly does not suffer from an intellectual disability.
Oh, okay. Now the judge would recount how much Dr. Shea, that's one of the doctors, reviewed Paul's history, behaviors, all of this stuff they went over to come up to these conclusions, to basically be like, you know what, I trust that they exhausted their resources to come up with this. Like, they're legit, basically, right? Now, on the part of manipulation, the judge said that we all want to believe that, right? The judge said that he asked the state for every single text message after the trial so that he could review them. I mean, y'all, we're talking thousands, right? And he said he read them 3 separate times all the way up to like a week before the sentencing.
Last week, Friday, the entire afternoon was spent reading through these things, and I think it's clear to me that Mr. Ferguson, although he says that he was scared of his mother, or there's an allegation of that standpoint, I find that just the opposite to be true based on those text messages. There is some mention about punishment, but I think Mr. Ferguson, in my opinion, being submissive, for lack of a better term, to his mother was a result that he really had nowhere else to go. He had been kicked out from his father's house for failing to obey his father's rules and for other things. And he went to his mother's house, and I don't think Mr. Ferguson really had anywhere else to go.
Now, there were even some text message evidence that the judge spoke of Shonda texting Paul and basically saying, you let Timothy know that if he doesn't obey you type thing, that she's going to leave Timothy to Paul. Almost like, I'm going to let the dogs out on you, Timothy. You better watch out. Now, the judge said that other times Paul's like pointing out things to his mom of bad things going on, almost as if looking for permission from her to inflict punishment on Timothy. And then the judge would also cite another eval that did not paint a good picture on Paul or his intentions.
Furthermore, despite reporting that he was under Ms. Vander Ark's, quote, psychological hold, he adamantly denied that he was coerced or manipulated into enforcing the abuse. Additionally, he recognized to some degree pleasure in having power and control over his younger brother. In this sense, while I acknowledge that he reported experiencing fear and concerns of disobeying Miss Van der Ark, I could not reliably substantiate his involvement as being a byproduct of suggestibility or coercion.
The judge will also recall a witness that stated that she considered Paul to be the biggest bully she ever knew, and that he got pleasure from the punishment he inflicted on his brother Timothy. He'll recite other reports that said, that Paul enjoyed this power over Timothy, he enjoyed pleasing his mother. And then finally the judge says that Paul is trying to shift the blame from himself to his mother, and that maybe had that been an isolated incident, okay, I get it, but that this behavior went on for months and for a long time.
What that tells me is that this has been a careful, manipulated story by Mr. Ferguson from the very beginning of this thing, that he's going to put the blame on his mom. I'm going to be manipulated. I have Asperger's syndrome. I have autism. I have Stockholm syndrome. There's mention of him saying, well, maybe I have Stockholm syndrome in here.
The judge will say that there are two individuals who do not have compassion or empathy. You already know who they are in this case, right? And the judge will say that yes, Shonda did use Paul to some degree. She did exploit the situation. She did exploit characteristics of his personality, but that Paul was all too happy to be the enforcer in this situation. And he goes one step further and he says that he feels like Paul is just one step away from becoming a psychopath like his mother. He believes that Paul would be a danger to the public should he ever be released. And finally, the judge does not think Paul is sorry at all.
And believe me, I've tried to sit here and try to think, well, maybe Mr. Ferguson's not as bad as Mom. I think you're just as bad, if not worse.
Woo! I mean, wow. And then, with all that being said, the judge inflicts the sentence. Watch Paul during this. Watch what he does.
Based on all that, it's a sentence of the court. You serve 30 years to 100 years, Michigan Department of Corrections. Credit for 592 days you've already served. Court's going to assess a $68 state cost, $130 crime assessment, no additional fines or costs.
I want to know what the defense was pointing to him. If it was like I wonder if he was pointing like these were the guidelines, or you know what I'm saying? Now let's rewind and look back at Paul's reaction here when he goes over and over. That look where he snaps his head up like that. First of all, if you watch him during the sentencing, he kind of gets distracted. He's not really paying that much attention. But when I saw him do this, it was like he would have been listening, and this jerked him back to reality. And it told me, and then his face kind of drops like this, like 30 years. Because in his mind, he has to be 30 years to 100. He clearly was not expecting that sentence, number one. He might have even been thinking, I'm going home, or I'm getting probation, or I'm getting a few years, or who knows what he was thinking. But clearly not that. And honestly, well, we'll talk about my thoughts in a second. So when he did that, I was like, oh, he was not expecting this. And this literally, you see the life drain from his face, right? At the realization of, I'm going to be at minimum, right? He is going to be a grown up man. I mean, he is a grown man now, but you know what I'm saying? Like my age group or whatever when he gets out, if it's done at that. Now, let's talk very quickly, a couple of things. First of all, the judge is basically like, remember back to what the state said in the beginning of, I want to have that long draconian kind of sentence if he doesn't show any rehabilitation in prison, because I think he'll be a danger. This is essentially what the judge did, right? And the judge basically is like, I don't think he's going to get treatment in prison. I don't think the judge read him to filth and threw the book at him. Now, let's get into some of my thoughts on it. So first of all, if you follow me for this case, the video that I did, I was one of the ones that was thinking Paul was a victim of his mother. Paul was, granted, did I like Paul's actions? No, obviously not, right? And that's what was complicated about the case then, was it was like he did these things, but I felt like, well, if he didn't, his mother probably would have done this to him and that, and blah, 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 blah. And the evidence looks like this, and she's manipulating him and doing this and doing that, blah, 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 blah. Now getting to this, where the judge is almost going outside of that, like, look, number one, context, let's talk about that. The judge is like, I read all the text messages because I wanted all the context, not just the highlights, which is basically what he said, the most salacious parts. And that's where it gets more tricky. It gets more nuanced when he's like, I'm reading this and it's clear that Paul's almost like, hey, Mom, I'm making this part up, but as an example, Mom, Timothy's doing this. What do you want me to do? What do you want me to do? I mean, what does that tell you? Seeking it out. Now, granted, yes, the judge acknowledges that this is very weird and tricky because in a sense, it's like, yeah, that is your mother. Yes, you did have these issues. Yes, you were kind of abandoned and abused yourself in this capacity. However, it's like independently of that, you got into this way too much is the vibe that I got. Where he was just like, look, you were right there alongside of this, enjoying this, inflicting this punishment, zero remorse. And he even cites examples in these interviews that Paul did for the evals where, and I'm going to just kind of use this as an example, but it's not verbatim, but almost like when the evaluators talk about, were you ever afraid of getting caught? And he's like, yes, and like, why? Basically, it was because he didn't want to get in trouble, right? He wasn't concerned, like, thinking that their behavior was bad or anything like that. It was like getting in trouble. And not with his mother, but like in general. So you could tell just from the little bit of evidence that was spoken of at sentencing that there was way more to this story with Paul, and again, where they're just like, no, look, he's not on the spectrum. He doesn't have A, B, C, and D. These aren't present. He might want to try and act like that and claim that. And he might have a certain affect that gives, because when he got up there was just something that didn't seem to be connecting, and you're kind of like, is he scared? Is he nervous? Is there something going on? And then as the judge spoke to or the defense, whoever, the state, where it kind of became this thing, even social media, where people talk about the case, where everyone just kind of was of the consensus that he had something going on, right? But then when these reports come back from people who dealt with him and worked with him and looked at this history, they're like, no, that's not the case. This might just be a case of pure evil, right? And that's what scares me of like the judge, when they see these cases day in, day out, and he's sitting here saying, you're basically a paycheck away from your mother. And we saw his mother, she's pure evil, right? Pure evil. So I felt like the judge did the right thing here, right? Because here's the thing, they left it open. So it's like this, if he gets in there and proves everybody wrong, and it's like, I've become this major, wonderful citizen of prison, I can work on the outside, I can do this, I can benefit society, great. You can get out in your 40s or maybe 50 or whatever and probably still have a chunk of life, right? And maybe he can get out sooner than that. I don't know how that works in his particular state, but if not, they can keep him in there. And I think that that's probably the appropriate thing, because the actions that he did, now looking through the lens, and this is just speaking for me, of, oh, wait a minute, okay, let's remove, like, not sympathy, but like thinking that he was a victim too on some level of this, and it was almost being like coerced into doing this. I'm like, oh, so wait, you enjoyed this? Oh no. Under the jail you go. You know what I'm saying? They literally tortured him to death. And to know that he got off on that in some way, no. Because his mother scared me, and I don't even know her in person, right? I was like, I could see being frightened of her and her wrath. I mean, she was scary. So anyways, that's it. Let me know what you think. Were you of the camp? This is one thing I'm curious from the Sofa Squad. Were you of the camp when this went off, or, when this happened, the trial, of, yeah, it's awful what Paul did, but he was also a victim of his mother, and if so, are you now more like, oh, well, wait a minute, I changed my mind? You see what I'm saying? Let me know your thoughts on that. I'm very curious. Anyways, that's it. Probably by the next video, see me, we'll be back at the sofa with Mr. Roscoe. We miss him. We're going to go find him. But anyways, go ahead and send some sofas down in the comment section for Roscoe to lure us back from the mountains to the comment section. And until we find our way down in that comment section, we'll see y'all soon. I just wanted to say thank you again for watching the whole video, and also thank you for being part of the Sofa Squad. Special thanks to all the Patreon members, channel members from both of my channels, everybody who likes, shares, subscribes, comments in the comment sections. It helps the channel out so much. Now, don't forget, I do have that other channel, the podcast channel. That's where we go live, we hang out, we talk. We have kind of sort of a schedule, but just be sure and check it out. I'll put it up here on the screen. Also, if you're looking for merch, be sure to check out my Teespring Spring store. I'll put that up here. And then, like I said in the beginning of the video, if you want to follow me and Roscoe on the Instagram, go on, check it out. It's right here on the screen again. But once again, thank you very much. I really appreciate you being part of the Sofa Squad, and I'll see you in the next video.